Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jono White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jono White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up to just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Today's guest is Peter Turnbull. Peter is Chair of Calix Limited. Welcome to the podcast, Peter.
Thank you very much, Jono. Great to be with you.
So first of all, can you tell our listeners a little bit about what you do as Chair of Calix Limited, but also some of the other roles that you have or recent things you've done?
Sure, Jono. Thank you. Um, as you mentioned, I'm the chair of the board of Calix Limited, which is a very rapidly growing clean tech company. It grew out of Australia and is now very much global in nature. We have a bit of a catchphrase at Calix that our lot in life is to help solve global challenges. So we're very focused on some of the world's bigger challenges such as emissions reduction, water remediation, aquaculture, feeding the world in more productive ways, that kind of thing. It's a tremendous company. And all of this comes out of one platform technology that we have patented. But my background is beyond Calix as well. I have what would be commonly referred to these days as a portfolio career. I'm on the board of other listed public companies, quite sizable companies, one of which is in the energy sector, particularly oil, based in Australia but operating in Brazil. I'm also very involved in emerging earlier stage technology companies in the medical sector in particular, and in the energy transition area where we're developing um, new gas reserves and things like that that will feed into the batteries and the other infrastructure of tomorrow to help reduce emissions and transform energy grids across the world. So it's a portfolio of directorships. I'm a non-executive in each case, although some are more hands-on than others. So a portfolio of different roles, many of which I chair, some of which I'm a non-executive director, working with other board members and a chair. So quite diverse, Jono, and certainly very interesting from my point of view.
Yeah, thank you so much for unpacking some of those different roles you have, and that's great. I want to find out a bit about your story. I know that listeners love hearing the stories of people like you doing incredible things. But where did it start? I guess if we kick off by looking back at your childhood, at growing up, are there any moments from that season of your life, or even themes that really shaped you to become the person and the leader you are today?
Yeah. Look, it's a really interesting question, Jono, and it's not something that I would think about in the ordinary course. But I think it is good to think about. Um, Look, I cast my mind back to my childhood. I had a very comfortable childhood. I think when I look back now, one of the things I reflect on greatly is the fact that I was given a great education. I think sometimes you have to get to quite a bit later in life to appreciate that properly and to value it properly. But I also grew up with parents who were very ethical, if I can put it that way. You know, ethics were part of life. Do it the right way. Do it once. Do it the right way. Kind of attitude. If I reflect back, and I think I guess you don't know where your personal traits really come from. Part of it environment, part of it genes, I suppose. But if I reflect on my own sort of um, capabilities, I have a great attention to detail. If I focus on something, I really focus on it. It's a sort of a never give up, keep focusing and look for that outcome kind of personality. So I guess they're the things that come to mind, Jono.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing some of those things. In your career, do you remember when you really had your first opportunity to lead, where some people it's coming back to sports, some people it's still when they were growing up, other people it was really the first time they managed a group of people. Do you remember your first real sort of leadership opportunity?
Um, yes, again, an interesting question. I think in my case, it is along the lines that you suggest. I mean, people tend to grow through different roles. The roles get bigger, and I think there's a progression that a lot of people go through from being a very competent and sometimes a very senior technical type manager, that sort of transforming itself into people management. And I think that's what happened in my case. I guess it was, in my 20s, I had bigger and bigger technical roles, but, moving into my sort of early 30s, that I guess you noticed for doing interesting or good things, and the promotion sort of comes with being a manager of people in time, and that's a big change. And for me, that was, I guess, in my early 30s. So the progression comes off the back of technical success and morphs, if you like, into more of a people management communication type role, which is quite different to being a competent technical manager.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that up because this is an area that, as I talk with leaders, I feel like is coming up more than ever before. And what I'm hearing is a lot of leaders are finding that there's a gap, say in the education sector, there's a gap that's there that they're really struggling to close between a wonderful teacher and that person who's very skilled at teaching and has studied teaching, has taught for many years or a few years, but then they're promoted into a role where suddenly they have responsibility over a group of people and the skill set is completely different. They talk about the gap. What did you find were the biggest gaps for you when you went from that individual contributor role to a leadership management role?
No, great question. Look, this comes back to, I guess, how I perceive business, and I think life in more generally. It's the really core skills are communication and negotiation for me, and I think they're the things that come to the fore where you're managing, whether it's managing a group of people or a whole organisation, or just trying to get through life. I mean, the things that matter the most to me are the ability to communicate and the ability to negotiate. Because if you think about your life on a daily basis, it's just a series of negotiations, one way or another. Most people wouldn't think of it in that sense, but that's what life is about. Can I do this? Should I do that? Will someone let me move in this direction? Whatever. It's just a series of negotiations, really. So having the skill to communicate to your team, to listen. I mean, I often say to people, listening is absolutely a skill, which is underrated in business. But your ability to communicate with your team, your ability to take feedback and listen to them, but to negotiate the way forward too, to make sure everyone's with you, is for me really quite critical. Now, not everyone possesses great negotiation skills because it's something we're not generally taught. It's something that's learnt by many along the way. Some much better than others, but I just sort of reflect that communication and negotiation skills, I think, are absolutely core to managing your team, but much further beyond as well, Jono.
Yeah, I love that communication and negotiation. If we talk about negotiation, what have you learned about how to negotiate? What are the lessons you've learned through life and leadership about how to do that well?
Um, well, look, there's a whole science behind negotiation and the skills that go with it. But I think, in broad terms, um, be flexible. You're not going to get everything you want every time, so you've got to be flexible. You've got to think about the different options that can fall out of a given situation, and you've also got to try and be ahead of the game, if I could put it that way. If one thing happens, where does that lead? Does A, B, or C happen? So you've got to be trying to think ahead, uh, and it's I guess it's to that sort of eye on the prize kind of setting. You want to get to a particular spot, so you've got to go keep in your mind, how do I get there if A, B, or C happens? Stay flexible, think ahead, try and anticipate the various things that can happen. But there's a lot more science behind having top-notch negotiation skills than that. But that's just sort of a broad brush, I guess, Jono.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. What about communication? Obviously, well, let me ask you this: in communication, do you find that you need very different skills from being, say, an executive team member in an organization with your employees versus being on a board, or do you feel like the skills that you're using now in communication as a board member or chair of different boards in governance are the same sort of skills that through your career you used in roles where you were leading or managing people in a team?
Yeah. Look, just thinking about that, I think if you're talking about being an executive and having a sizable team, comparing that to being on a board, say chairing a board and dealing with the other non-exec board members and the executive team, I think there are some similarities, because what you're trying to convey is, generally speaking, a vision. We're trying to get to X point in the future. How do we do that? You're trying to make sure there's confidence around that vision. I mean, do others agree with it, or do others think it's not plausible? And you're trying to make sure or bring together commitment and people. I think commitment's very important when you're trying to execute on a vision, and people are central to everything. So you're trying to convince a group of people. They're a different group in executive and non-executive aspects to some extent, but it's still a group of people, and you're trying to convince a group of people in many senses to come with you as the leader. So it's got to make sense. They've got to be with you. They've got to understand what you're trying to achieve, and you've also got to make sure that you do understand and draw out any negativity, because people aren't generally, you know, people don't tend to be upfront in putting the negatives back to you. So I think that's an important part of moving forward with any vision. Actually asking people, is there agreement? Are there other views? That's where that listening that I mentioned earlier, I think, comes in. I think good leaders are quite proactive at drawing that out, looking for it and drawing it out and dealing with it. Because if there isn't a commonality of view, you've got problems moving ahead to achieve the goals that you've set for yourself.
Yeah, that's so true. As you think of your career, up to now, I love to ask about aha moments. Some of those times or those seasons or sometimes really specific moments that for some reason stick with you and they're very memorable because the penny drops about something, or it's a lesson learned or on an idea, or just a really valuable lesson comes through from a situation. Can you think of any aha moments that really come to mind at the moment from your career, Peter?
Yeah, look, there's probably a couple, Jono. I'm very involved in technology, as I think you can tell from the earlier introductions. I guess it's only in more recent times that I've really understood what it's going to mean. The technology revolution, if you like, the fourth industrial revolution, how big this is, what it means for the world is absolutely enormous. The digitisation of the world and where all this is going, and how it's going to affect people. So that's, it's a great challenge, but it's also a great pathway to improve many aspects of what goes on, what is and will in the future go on in the world. And I think kind of a subset of that, I'm also involved, as I mentioned earlier, in the what people would generally call the energy transition. that is the transition of the use of energy from fossil fuels in the main to renewables to reduce emissions all over the world. So this is an absolutely enormous transition, and I guess it's only in recent years that's sort of dawned on me in terms of how big it is and what great opportunities there are around that. And I think, thirdly, a more general but really valuable aha moment is that you're not the one really creating the value. Good people around you really create the value. You're managing people, uh, in some cases very big groups of people, but it's those people collectively, what they do, that really creates the value.
Yes, I love that. I love that perspective, and it's such the challenge of leadership. I think that great leaders get things done through people, but often
Mm.
people end up, you know, we get leadership opportunities because of what we've been able to do. If we come back to what we mentioned before, the individual contributor, the technical ability, it's what
Yeah,
I do that gets me the opportunity.
yeah,
Now I'm in a leadership role, and now everything changes, and all of a sudden,
yep,
um, my really what I need to learn to do is actually get things done through people, and that
yeah.
is there any advice you'd give to leaders about how to make that change? Like, what do you need to see differently? How do you need to think differently to get things done through the people around you rather than trying to just do things yourself?
Yeah. Look, again, a great question. I guess the first thing is to do what we're talking about here. That's to realise, fundamentally realise that these two situations are different. That you are moving from being, a senior technical person to a manager who is responsible for a small, medium, or large team. So, first thing is to realise what you're trying to do is quite different. Um, but I think, as we said earlier, Jono, a lot of it gets back to managing a team is about that communication and negotiation again. I mean, you can't sit in a darkened office and be unavailable. Obviously, if you've got to be out there engaging with the team to start with, I guess is a more positive way to put it. You've got to be looking for the two-way feedback. You've you've got to be you've got to be seen to be part of your own team. Be available, be engaging, be looking for positive and negative feedback at any given time. And I think it's very important too for leaders. We would term it walk the talk today, and I think um, it's a bit of a catchphrase, but I think it has real meaning for leaders. You need to lead by example. What you do must be consistent. It must not be different to any other standards you set for your team. You have to be leading by example, and I think the minute you move away from that kind of standard, it's the kind of thing that's immediately noticed and negatively commented on. So you want to be
Yes.
a leader, you lead by example, lead by your own consistent standards, and be every bit as good, if not better, in terms of those standards as you would expect any member of your team to be.
Yeah, I love that. Walking, walk the talk.
Mm,
It's such good advice because, like you said, it's amazing how quickly people will pick up on it if we're not living that out.
for
Um,
sure, for sure.
y- you mentioned also just realizing the significance of the the change across society going on right now. What would you say to leaders? What do you see as the most common misconceptions or the areas that people, from your experience, really need to change their thinking to embrace how the world's moving so that we don't sort of get stuck and realize, oh wow, I'm sort of still 10 years, I'm thinking like everything was 10 years ago, but things have moved so quickly. How do we
Mm,
need to
mm.
change our thinking?
Um, Look, we are in a very difficult world at the minute, not just because of the very serious and obvious war-related issues in Eastern Europe, but that is one issue. But if you look at the bigger picture, COVID has really disrupted the world, and in particular, as everyone knows, all sorts of supply chains, as well as the ability to find and retain good people. I think many leaders around the world are grappling with the difficulties of getting and keeping the right people. So I think people, number one, is a huge issue at the minute. How do I find the people I want? How do I find enough people? How do I find the right people? Then how do I keep them? That's where things like employee incentive and option plans come in. I think over the next few years they will in the companies that have them will become even more important. So number one, people's a big issue, Jono. And we're in a much more global world now, even though it seems to be, in some senses, shrinking back a little bit from the globalisation we knew. But it's possible to have other people taken on in other parts of the world now that we might not have thought about even a few years ago. So your pool for talent may, in some senses, be much bigger. But it's a real issue, I think, getting and retaining the right people. I think, secondly, I like to focus on the management of risk quite a bit, because I think COVID has been a wake-up call itself for the world in terms of, whoops, well, we really didn't see that coming, did we? We've all got risk matrices that run for probably 30 pages in some cases, and you detail the most minute risks across an organisation, but most of it, I mean, how many of us can say that we really saw COVID coming and we were really in a position to manage a global pandemic properly? So, I think COVID's been a bit of a wake-up call in terms of how we perceive and manage risk. So, I think the leaders of today really need to think about people, finding them, keeping them, and having another look at how risk is really managed, and are we doing that as best we can.
Yeah, that's so true around COVID and risk. I want to ask you something about your roles with boards and in governance. There are a lot of leaders who will have experience. Maybe they started as an entrepreneur and built their own organization, or maybe they've been manager and now they're in a more senior leadership role. But I feel like to a lot of leaders, they scratch their heads to really understand exactly what it is and what goes on in a role where, doing what you do in your day-to-day work. I feel like sometimes people scratch their heads to understand it. So it's a bit of an introductory question, but can you unpack, I guess, exactly what is the role of a board of, say, a listed company, and particularly the chair, and also, if you don't mind the sort of silly question, but what do you actually do in that role? Like, what are the practical things that you'll do in a role like many of the roles you have, Peter?
Yeah. Oh, look. Fundamentally, if we're talking about, let's sort of focus on listed companies, which can be, small, medium, or large, but listed companies and also private companies too. The role of the board is fundamentally to ensure that the company has the right strategy, number one. Number two, that the company has the right governance platform and processes and standards. And I think importantly, and there's other ones apart from the ones I'll mention, but other roles as well. But number three, the big roles would be to make sure that you've got the right management team in place, and that particularly means the CEO or the managing director. It's fundamental for a board to have the right leader at executive level. And that's, that's often where boards and chairs and myself in the past, you can get that wrong. I mean, there's no guarantees when you take on a new CEO that it's all going to work out. Everyone does it with the best of intentions, but sometimes it doesn't work out. And over time, obviously, organisations change, and the CEO of yesterday is not the CEO you need for tomorrow. So fundamentally, Jono, the board really focuses on strategy, governance, and the leadership team. The chair themselves, his or her role is to manage the board. In simple terms, it's to manage the board. So that's a board of like-minded equals, like-minded non-executive directors. Boards can be very fragile things because there's all sorts of different personalities, there's egos, there's different agendas. You're throwing a bunch of different people into one room, essentially. That's what you're doing. And they'll have different technical skills, they'll have different backgrounds, they'll have different level of ability to allocate time. Some people have too many board roles these days, for instance. So what I mean by all of that is it can be quite a fragile environment. So the role of the chair, therefore, is absolutely critical. So the chair's there to manage this group. The chair's there to work with the company secretary, if there is one, or at least the senior leadership team, to set the agenda, set the forward agenda. What does the board need to be looking at and when? And the chair particularly also builds a very important bridge, or needs to build a very important bridge between the board itself and the CEO or managing director. Chairs and the leader of the executive leader of an organisation tend to work very closely together, much more so than any other non-executive director. So that bridge and that bond is really very important. That can be quite fragile too, and that also doesn't always work out and can be different at given times in an organisation's development. So fundamentally, the chair is there to manage the board, to make sure the forward agenda is what it needs to be, and to listen to the views of other board members. Obviously, there's that sort of two-way communication loop going on there too, because non-executive types are no different to executive types. They're not necessarily going to put all the negatives right in front of you. So it's important, again, to draw out disagreements or people-related issues. Directors don't always get on with each other, for instance. So, there's a real listening and communication exercise there too, Jono.
Yeah, one thing that I find interesting about boards is when I'm working with an executive team, you, I guess one of your biggest tools in the toolkit for the leader is your regular leadership team, executive team meetings, and that time together to understand each other, to make sure that you're aligned. One of the challenges that I see with boards is that you often don't have as much time together as, say, an executive team does. How do you manage that? How do you manage the fact that, like you said, sometimes you'll have these interpersonal challenges, but you don't have the weekly rhythm of being together that executive teams do?
Yeah. Look, that's a great observation, and it's been made, that particular issue for many has been made all the worse by COVID, because we're all zoomed out, we're all teamed out now. We're all, I think, getting a little bit tired of holding all our meetings via online platforms, which has, for most boards, cut out the chance to have a dinner, for instance, the night before the board meeting, or a lunch. Or whatever, just a little bit of social, not like the old days when it used to be way back. It used to be much more of a focus on that as the key issue, but just it's negated the time available these days in person to get to know each other. So, look, in that sense, it is a great observation. There's no easy answer to it. I mean, everybody has made the online platforms work, but I think we're at a point now, certainly for boards, where people are very much ready to be with each other again and to spend a bit more time together to do that, to make sure that that lunch or dinner or just a few hours of social time together is happening and is possible again. I think the other thing that COVID's probably stopped happening for most boards is site visits. The bigger companies to visit a factory or to visit a facility. Uh, that used to be quite routine for bigger sort of companies in particular. So the board members would spend time together, going to a site or a facility or something like that, and talking with the team wherever they went. So I think that sort of thing is going to start up again, and probably has already for some. So look, I think the only answer, Jono, is that you recognise the problem, you recognise what COVID has certainly stopped happening, and I think many of us really need to get back into having that time together again.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's no substitute for that. And, talking with a lot of leaders, even in the day-to-day operation, one of the challenges of remote work, which isn't going anywhere, and we all know that in some, it's just we're going to have to
Yeah.
get used to it. That it's going to look different, but is people have gone from being in an office together to remote, and they've realized that there were all these incidental, immeasurable, informal communications that happen. The quick, pop into the office when something comes up, rather
Yep.
than sending an email. The bringing in a coffee for your mate and sitting over a coffee, or going into the
Yep.
kitchen making a cup of tea. And no one's measuring those, but I think people are realizing once you take them away, suddenly a miscommunication pops up that can actually be quite serious, and you realize, why is this happening? And I keep hearing leaders talk about how I think they're learning that those little incidental communication and moments of being together and working together in teams has
Yeah.
probably had a bigger impact than we realized.
I absolutely agree with that, Jono. I think that's a great observation. Um, email and text does not convey feelings. It does not convey the same way body language, feelings, or emphasis. That's part of this issue. But it's a big change. I agree. I think it's a great observation, and we need to think about this carefully, and we need to think about, if you're going to pursue the hybrid model, how do you make sure that these misunderstandings, or how do you make sure misunderstandings aren't happening, and how do you make up for the loss of these intangibles, if I can call them that, that we're losing? The other thing that I think is happening a bit is that, instead of walking into the office with a coffee, as you said, it's an email or a text or something like that, which just creates another thing on the list to deal with, and in many cases an element of further delay. If the whole organisation is trying to get on with things, I mean, you don't want a fundamental model that just keeps putting further time delay into the system. Get text, get email, need to answer. That'll be half an hour or a day later, whatever it is. So it's not the same sort of almost instantaneous engagement that happens in an office, and I think that's an issue too.
Yeah, I think it's a big opportunity for people in say technology, or for people who are interested in creating products and software. I think anything that helps to solve this problem, anything that
Mm.
people go, oh, when I use this, it really helps to facilitate these sort of conversations. Um, and I don't even know what that looks like, but I really believe that anyone who can really create innovation in this area, I think is going to be incredibly successful.
I absolutely agree, Jono. I don't know exactly what it looks like yet either, but we need to understand what we've lost here. If we're going to, as is going to happen, it's going to be a hybrid model for many. We need to know how we're going to make up that deficit.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me jump into Leadership Express questions. I've got a few questions for you, Peter. Are you ready?
Yep, sure.
Okay, the first one is, what's a book that you've gifted to other people?
Look, this is something that was given to me some time back. It's a book, and I've given it to many other people since, but it's a book called Numbers Don't Lie. It's by Vaclav, Vaclav, Vaclav Smil, Smil. It's a very interesting book about numbers and how numbers fit into the world. And in some senses, it sounds ridiculous, but how the world works. It's a really good read. Uh, Vaclav is actually a guy that Bill Gates admires greatly. So that'll give you some idea of the sort of quality of the content.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great recommendation. I haven't had that one before, so thank you. Are there any
It's well worth
podcasts?
reading.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting topic. Are there any podcasts that you are really enjoying right now, or any books that you're currently reading, any blogs you're following?
Uh, There's one I'm about to listen. Well, it's actually a webinar. I forgot to mention at the front end, Jono. I'm one of my other roles is I'm president of the Chartered Governance Institute, which is a global governance organisation that's been around for 130 years and has about 30,000 members all around the world. It's a tremendous organisation and well worth people in corporate life having a look at, the Chartered Governance Institute. But the Institute's just put on a webinar about the ethical governance of artificial intelligence, which I think will be on the website. I'm about to listen to that because I couldn't be there for the live event. So I think it's a great topic. We
Yeah.
hear about artificial intelligence a lot. It is playing a role, but we don't hear so much about how this is all going to potentially unfold. So this is an interesting angle, being the ethical side of how AI is going to be governed.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great recommendation for listeners to go and check out. Okay, let me ask you this: do you have any favorite questions you ask? Maybe you're in a board meeting, and this is something that you always ask as part of your process, or if you're interviewing for a CEO as part of the process to bring someone on board, or just when you're with a team. Any favorite questions?
Um, I guess when I'm trying to understand people's behaviours. So I think as a chair, particularly, you're trying to understand what's driving someone. So I will ask questions that try to get to the underlying behaviour, particularly if it's something that's a little bit hard to understand. So, I'll ask people to clarify what they've said in some cases, or be clear or clearer about an option that they're putting forward. So for me, it's just trying to be really clear about what someone's really thinking. Again, because the negative stuff is not just going to naturally rise to the top in many cases and be transparent. So for me, it's just
Mm.
about asking generally clarifying questions that draw out further detail to test what someone's really thinking, particularly if you're a little bit unsure about whether what they're saying is either the full story or the right story.
Yeah, that's a great thought, great advice. What is a commonly held belief about governance that you passionately disagree with?
Um, Look, there would be some views around the world that governance is just a complicating factor, that governance isn't valuable. Uh, my organisation is just full of process and procedure, and it's all governance's fault within the organisation, or even a government or whatever, that we can't get things done. I think that's just a nonsense sort of a proposition. Uh, the fundamental good governance of any organisation is the core of its value. You do things properly, you do them once, you do them properly, you do them in the best interests of your stakeholders, and that's where the value derives from. But some people in some parts of the world, and some people, there can be a bit of a backlash to blaming governance for being too complex or too pervasive or gets in my way. Quite often, as you would know, John, I mean that's an argument for people, in essence, wanting to do the wrong thing, or cutting corners,
Yes.
or whatever else might come with that underlying behaviour.
Yeah, that's right. No, I really appreciate you sharing that, and I think that's why yeah, good governance and healthy governance is the opposite of that, right? Like it really does prioritize the right thing, and it's incredibly important, particularly when you are talking about
Absolutely.
large organizations with significant responsibilities. Um, Speaking
Yeah.
once again about boards, what's a big struggle or problem that board chairs and board members are facing today?
I think, look, in broad terms, Jono, how to regroup after COVID, and what COVID has uh, reaped on them. I mean, it's been a very, very significant event, this global pandemic, and as we touched on earlier, I mean, none of us really saw this coming to the degree that it has reshaped and disrupted the world. So I think people are trying to come to grips, boards and board chairs and the senior management team are trying to come to grips with what does the post-COVID organisation look like? How much was it affected by COVID? One of the other aspects of COVID that's really only occurred at the back end, if I can put it that way, is all the supply chain disruption is a much more recent event, which again, I don't think everyone saw coming. So many organisations are now grappling with what that supply chain disruption means to them. They're in a position to get on with life, but they're being prevented from conducting their business as well as they could because of these supply chain disruptions. So that's a major event. But I guess it's a replanning of the organisation, or a reviewing of where the organisation is post-COVID, and what are the new goals, if any. I mean, maybe things haven't changed, but at least you need to have a very good look to make sure that's the right answer. And where things do need to change, I think all that's sort of happening at the minute. Setting new goals, setting new
Mm.
targets, working out how you're going to work. In many cases, as we've touched on, with a hybrid employment model, not the one that you've been used to for many years. So I think they're probably the key things at the minute for many, Jono.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question: if you could only give one piece of leadership advice to a young leader, what would you say?
I think that comes back to our earlier point. Quite simply, be an effective communicator and negotiator.
I do love it when there's a good theme that comes back around through an episode. No, that's wonderful advice,
That
Peter.
one will stand you in good stead.
Yeah, no, I really love it. I really do. There's actually a great book on negotiating. It's called "Split the Difference." That's been really popular. It's been on the New York Times bestseller. I don't know if you've come
Yeah.
across that by Chris Voss.
I haven't seen it yet, no, but I will have a
Yeah,
look.
yeah. Since it's something you're so passionate about, I'd highly recommend it. I always test these things out. Whenever I recommend something, you see what comes back to you. And this book, whenever I've recommended it to anyone, they always come back and rave about it. They've read it multiple times, but it's Chris Voss was an FBI negotiator, hostage negotiator, and he's basically written this book to apply to life and business and leadership, based on the principles that they used as FBI, hostage negotiators, which just gives a lot of depth to and incredible stories as well. So, yeah, wonderful,
That
a wonderful
fantastic.
book. Yeah, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's a great book.
Great.
Well, for people who have really enjoyed today and have enjoyed your advice and want to find out more about some of the organisations that you're involved in, or on LinkedIn or Twitter, are you very active anywhere there? Is there anywhere people can follow you or find you online, Peter?
Oh yes, John. I look. LinkedIn's probably there's the websites of the various companies, but I think LinkedIn's probably the easiest place to go to, which is under Peter J. Turnbull AM.
Excellent. People can check that out. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. I love having episodes that cover different topics, and it's been wonderful to chat with Peter today and to spend a good amount of time talking about boards and governance. And I think there'll be a lot of leaders who will have learned something new. I know I definitely have. It's been really wonderful to lean in and learn from Peter. For our listeners, don't forget that I also have the John O. White Leadership Podcast and the Leadership Question of the Day podcast, two other places where you can go to invest in your leadership. But I want to finish today by saying a massive thank you to you, Peter, for being so generous with your time and for sharing really wonderful wisdom with me and with our listeners. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, Jono, and thank you to your listeners for listening. Much appreciated.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you, if you're going, not me, well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 Questions on Leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, and it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time. And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you, and please do that. And look for me, Jono White, or Clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.